All right, so this is presentation 2 over the Middle East. This one will be getting into Middle Eastern history, as well as kind of some current issues as well, some things that we see today. All right, so quick history. We'll start with religion. So remember again, your three main monotheistic religions started here. First one being Judaism, and then Christianity, and then Islam was the last one. And today, most of the region is Muslim. All right, so like I said, Judaism started first. So remember, like with Abraham, we talked about Father Abraham, and how he was the father of the Jews through Isaac, and then Isaac giving birth to Jacob, and then Jacob giving birth to what would become the 12 tribes of Israel. And so that goes through all the Old Testament stories, basically. And then we also mentioned a little bit about the Roman Empire taking over, and then they destroyed Israel in 70 AD. So about 40 years or so after the crucifixion of Jesus, the Romans come in and totally destroy Israel. And the Jews have to flee. This is called the Jewish diaspora, or dispersion. So the Jews mainly spread into Europe, where they're going to be persecuted for the next 2,000 years. So all throughout the Middle Ages, Jews are persecuted heavily. Like if anything went wrong in European society, for the most part during the Middle Ages, the Jews are the ones that got blamed and killed for it. And then, of course, that culminates with the Holocaust during World War II. So for a solid 2,000 years, the Jews will not have a homeland. So from 70 AD until about 1949, the Jews have no homeland whatsoever and are persecuted like no other group during that 2,000 years. All right, and then Christianity starts. CE is the same thing as AD, so don't worry about that. So with the birth of Jesus, and then of course his ministry and death, and as Christians believe his resurrection, and then from there Christianity spread mainly throughout the Roman Empire. So like I mentioned, the Jews are defeated. Jerusalem was destroyed in 70 AD. By 73 AD, they're out of Israel, so Israel doesn't exist after that point. And the Jews are moving out to other parts of the world. And so, like I said, it's called the diaspora, and that is a key term you'll need to know. So, again, most of them are going to stay within the Roman Empire. So they're going to go into Greece, Italy, France, and Spain. Some will move further north, and over time they'll start moving into Germany and stuff like that, and over into England. And then along North Africa, Egypt, and then along the northern coast of Africa, because all that was part of the Roman Empire. All right, so Islam starts around 622 AD or CE. Don't worry about it. So it starts around there, of course, with Muhammad. We've already talked about Islam some as far as basic beliefs and stuff like that. So they do believe in one God. They believe Muhammad was the greatest of all the prophets. They don't believe that Muhammad was like the son of God or anything like that. So in Christianity, Christians worship Jesus as God, whereas in Muhammad within Islam, is just an important person, but he's still just a man. But he's the most important prophet. And so he was born in Mecca, and then he said he heard an angel appear to him in a cave that he would hang out in by himself to meditate. And he wrote those, well, he didn't write it down, but he told those sayings, what he said was told to him, to other people, and eventually started the religion of Islam. And then the Bedouins, I mentioned the Bedouins in the last set of notes. The Bedouins are the semi-nomadic people that move throughout the region. They're the first converts, and because they move around a lot throughout the region, Islam is going to spread pretty quickly everywhere else. All right. And Islam, unlike other religions, Islam very quickly becomes militaristic. And so they turn into empire building. So from the beginning, Islam was very much not just a personal religion, but also a political system to basically control countries as well with certain Islamic laws. And so we see that with Islam, unlike other religions. Christianity starts out as just a personal religion, but then the Pope and the Catholic Church during the Middle Ages in Europe do turn it into this political system. So we see Islam do the same sort of thing that Christianity did in Europe, while the Catholic Church was mainly in control up into the Reformation that we talked about in Europe. So anyways, Islam's going to control everything in the Middle East and then along North Africa. So like I said, this is why that region today going into North Africa is very similar to the Middle East because of this empire that they have here. With this, you did have religious toleration to an extent. So they did try to push Christians and Jews out, but you could say they try to do it in a nice way in most areas. And of course, in some areas, you could be heavily persecuted or killed for not being Muslim. But for the most part, what they did is they just taxed Christians and Jews. So if you were a Muslim, then you didn't have to pay any taxes. They also believed and still believe today that if you're born into a Muslim family, that you're Muslim at birth. And so they kind of see it like an ethnic group more than a religion in that sense. Because like with Judaism, religiously speaking anyways, and with Christianity, if you're born into a family that your parents are Christian, you're not considered a Christian when you're born just because your parents are Christians. That's a personal decision you make. Same thing with the religious side of Judaism. I mean, if you're ethnically Jewish, then you're ethnically Jewish when you're born, obviously. But if you're ethnically Jewish, it's still up to you to decide if you're going to follow the religion of Judaism or not, because you may not. You could pick something else. So most other religions don't see themselves as being born into it as far as like, oh, I'm this just because my parents were. But within Islam, they do. And so the idea is that if you are born into a Muslim family, you're Muslim, therefore when you grow up, you don't pay any taxes. But if you switch religions, if you switch from Islam, you're like, I'm not going to be Muslim anymore, I'm going to be Jewish or Christian. Now you have to pay taxes. So here you're seeing an economic push on people in order to get them to switch religions. So if you're a Christian or a Jew and you're poor and you have a hard time paying all these taxes, well, the incentive then is to obviously switch religions, and then you don't have to pay taxes anymore. So it's an economic pressure on people to get them to convert without putting a sword to their throat, basically. It's just a different kind of pressure. Also, Christians and Jews were not allowed to talk about the religion to other people, so they couldn't go around and talk about the religion, what they believed, in hopes to get more converts. That could be punishable by death. So tolerant is used very lightly here. It's not really that tolerant overall. All right, and then you get the Mongolian invasion. So we mentioned this before. The Mongolians are going to create one of the largest empires in history. They take over most of Asia and Eastern Europe. And of course, they're going to conquer Muslim areas. Now, the Mongols, once they conquered a region, they would allow you to keep your religion and culture and stuff like that. But because of that, that means Mongolian culture is actually going to change more because they're going to get these ideas and different beliefs from the different regions they conquer, causing them to convert. So a lot of Mongolians are going to convert to Islam as well, and that's going to cause Islam to spread more throughout this much greater region, throughout Asia and parts of Europe, because of the connection the Mongolian Empire creates. So just remember, anytime an empire is involved and you have an expansion of an empire, when peacetime kind of comes into that empire, you're going to see a lot more trade, and you're going to see ideas and stuff like that move a lot quicker from region to region. And culture changes quickly during those kind of times. All right, and then fast forward to get the Ottoman Empire, which is Turkish. So keep in mind the Turks are a different ethnic group than the Arabs. So they're still majority Muslim as far as religion goes, but they're two different ethnic groups. So the Ottoman Turks are going to take over the region in yellow that you see there, so parts of North Africa, parts of the Middle East, and then going into southeastern Europe. And from there, a lot of people will convert to Islam. Like when we talked about the Bosnian genocide in Europe before the midterm, I mentioned how, there were Muslims throughout that region in southeastern Europe, like Bosnian Muslims and stuff like that. They became Muslim because of this empire that ruled from 1453 until 1917. All right, architecture. So this is kind of a little bit of a shift. There are a couple of buildings that you need to know as far as what they are. So this is the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem. If you've ever seen any pictures of Jerusalem at all, like skyline and stuff, you'll always see the Dome of the Rock. So this was built in 691. That is actual gold on top and all throughout. It's a beautiful mosaic going around. So this is one of the most important mosques within Islam. And it's actually a point of contention between Muslims and Jews because whenever the Romans conquered Jerusalem, keep in mind Jerusalem is a very important city. It's been attacked and conquered more than any other city on earth. And so whenever the Romans destroyed Jerusalem and kicked the Jews out, the Jews had a temple in this spot. So like when you get into like Christianity and you hear the story about Jesus turning over the tables, the markets at the temple, it was there, right around this area. And anyway, so when the Romans come in, they totally destroy the temple, the Jewish temple, burn it to the ground, destroy it over, knock it over, and everything like that. The Jews have not had a temple to go to where they believe, the presence of God is. They have not had a temple since 70 AD. So it's been almost 2,000 years. They have not had a temple at all. And so, because they've only had Israel back since right after World War II. But the problem is the Dome of the Rock is built exactly where their temple was. And so they would love to have their temple, and they would love to have it right there. But of course, you can't do that with the Dome of the Rock there. And obviously, it's not like they're going to just move the Dome of the Rock or anything like that. So that is a point of contention. All right, so there you can see the mosaic going on the outside. A lot of Muslim architecture uses a lot of mosaics and stuff. They have very pretty architecture and artwork. And then this is the mosque in Istanbul, Turkey. That's the Solomon Mosque. It was built in the 1500s. Giant mosque there you can see from the front. All right, so modern history a little bit. All right, so at 1800s, North Africa gets... it goes really from Ottoman control to European control. The Europeans start coming in and taking over North Africa and making them colonies, mainly the British and the French. So like, for example, Egypt is going to go to the British and stuff like that. So British and French are going to control kind of that northern region. The British are going to commission the building of the Suez Canal in Egypt, which is a super important canal that allows people to, like the Europeans, to go through the Mediterranean, go through the Suez Canal, come out into the Red Sea, and then get to the Indian Ocean. That way you don't have to go all the way around Africa to get there. You can see on this map here, or at least partially you can see it. Going around Africa from London to Mumbai is 12,300 miles, but you cut through the Suez Canal, it cuts it down to 7,200 miles. So they had that built for us. That's a very important strategic waterway. That's a U.S. Aircraft carrier going through the Suez Canal to get to the Red Sea. So today that's extremely important canal there. All right. So like I said, it's mainly the British and French that are going to conquer these areas. As they take over Northern Africa, they're going to take out the tribal leaders like out of power and then create these colonies. We're going to talk a lot about this when we get to Africa, because the Europeans doing this to Africa, like in the rest of Africa, is really going to mess it up. It's going to create most of the problems you see in Africa today is really kind of started by the Europeans. So I guess it's going to encourage, you're going to see an income gap between the rich and poor and stuff like that throughout the Middle East and North Africa. You still see that today. It's still present all throughout Africa, really, and the Middle East, and so on and so forth. You don't really have to worry about protectorates and what that is. All right, World War One. World War I is super important in this region. Also, when we get to Africa, really kind of for the same reasons. But World War I, so you got European powers going to war, but the European powers have colonies all over the world, which is why all these colonies get involved and ends up being a world war, because they bring all the colonies they have in. So on the our enemy's side would be Germany under Kaiser Wilhelm II, Enver Pasha of Turkey, and you can only see his picture, but Franz Joseph of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, which is southeastern Europe. On the side we're going to fight for, which is the Allies, you have Nicholas II. George, oh, by the way, Nicholas II is Russia. George V of Great Britain, Victor Emmanuel of Italy, and then Poincaré from France. And so it's going to be them battling it out. But this is key, is a promise they're going to make, the Allies. Promise they make to their colonies, and specifically the colonies in the Middle East, since we're talking about the Middle East and North Africa. They're going to tell the colonies, like, hey, we need more people to fight for us. But think about it for a second. If you're a colony, you probably hate the European country that controls you. Because keep in mind, just think about our own revolution. Like, we fought against the British because we were a bunch of colonies that were being mistreated by the British. And so we fought them to get our independence. And so, obviously, they know that their colonies would love to be independent. And so, they're going to promise their colonies, hey, if you fight for us, like you come over here and fight for us, and we win this war, then we'll grant you independence. You'll have freedom. And so, of course, the people in the colonies are like, heck yeah, look, we're going to sign up and go do that because they want their freedom. And what better way can you get it than fighting for the country that's controlling you, and they're promising you freedom? Like, that's a huge promise. Even Gandhi, and Gandhi was like a super pacifist in India. He's the one that said, an eye for an eye will make the whole world blind. Even Gandhi was like, oh yeah, go and fight. Like, let's get in there. We can get our independence super easily that way without actually having to fight the British. But, of course, these guys aren't going to keep their promise. They're just going to say that to get people to fight. All right, in World War I, we talked about it being super deadly. It killed about 12 million people. It was the deadliest war in history up to that point until we get to World War II. It was also considered really the first modern war where we see modern weapons like we have today. All right. So let me go back here. All right. So like I said, they're going to promise all this. They're not going to get it. The Ottoman Empire is going to fall during World War I. So that's the last empire on Earth that we've had. So that falls in 1917. Allies win. So again, that's our side. We don't get involved in this war until the last year of the war. And kind of mow over the enemy. So the only country that's going to become independent and free from any kind of colonial power is going to be Turkey. So the country as Turkey today, the modern version of it, started in 1917. So they become independent. Other countries, though, Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, Palestine, which will become Israel later, Transjordan, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, all that, nope. And this is, again, how bought in the Islamic leaders were. This is Hussein ibn Ali, who is the Sharif of Mecca. And he said Britain is prepared to recognize and uphold the independence of the Arabs in all regions lying within the frontiers proposed by the Sharif of Mecca. And that was in 1915. So basically telling his people that, hey, the British, they're going to promise us independence, so let's go out there and fight. But of course, it turns around. So instead of giving them independence, the British and French mainly decide to occupy the region even more so. And so it gets divided up basically between the countries. This is an easier way of looking at how it gets divided up. So the French will maintain control of Syria and Lebanon. The British will get Palestine, which will later become Israel. Transjordan goes to the British. That's current day Jordan. And then the British also get Iraq. And so we've had some issues in this region as of late. Syria, of course, has a major civil war going on, and you still have bits of the terrorist organization ISIS. Al-Qaeda is also prevalent throughout the region, another terrorist organization. Another terrorist organization the Palestinians have, they actually have two of them, Hamas and Hezbollah. And so we've got a lot of issues in this region, and a lot of it goes back to this event, World War I. So this promise that the Western powers made and then turned their backs on them and actually took more control from them. And so the key idea here is the distrust. So you got a large distrust from countries in the Middle East to Western powers. And we get thrown into this because we're good friends with the British and French at this point. We are their allies. And the fact that we just kind of go along with it after World War I instead of really trying to get the British and French to change their minds, they throw us in there with it. Like, okay, we can't trust them anymore because they say one thing and they do another. And then of course this is going to create a lot of problems we see today. Like, think about the rise of ISIS in Syria, and you started seeing terrorist attacks, especially in France and Great Britain. Well, why are you going to see it there? Just look at this map. Who's controlling most of the region? France and Great Britain. So it's a getting back at them for what occurred post-World War I and throughout the rest of the 20th century. Doesn't justify it whatsoever, but at least you see from their point of view, especially from these terrorist organizations, this is what they're looking at. And this is what's going to help fuel that distrust and that hatred towards Western Europe and the United States behind it, backing these European powers. So we got the civil war today in Syria going on there, impacting us. We've had 2 wars in Iraq. The British there's 3 ethnic groups in Iraq. We even suggested to the British early on, like, hey, when Iraq gets their freedom, create 3 different countries, 1 for each ethnic group. And the British are like, no, they're fine. We'll just, Iraq, and they'll all live together in peace and harmony. And that did not happen. It ended up being a genocide in the late 1980s. Yeah, there's a lot of problems with this region. A lot of it goes back to the interaction between Europe and the Middle East and what was done after World War I. So that's kind of a big picture idea that we're going to be following, this distrust of the West and really how it's seeded at this time after World War I. All right, that's it for this presentation, and I'll see y'all.